Finance and Budgeting Committee meeting for Monday, May 18th, 2015 to order. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Calling the roll, Mr. Greenspan.
Here.
Mr. Miller. Mr. Jones.
Here.
Mr. Hairston.
Here.
Mr. Gallagher.
Here.
Mr. Schron.
Here.
Ms. Brown. Here. We have a quorum.
Very good, thank you. Is there any public comment related to the agenda?
No, Mr. Chair.
Okay, before us are the May 4th committee meeting minutes. If the committee's had an opportunity to review it, I'll entertain a motion to accept as presented or a motion to amend.
Move to accept.
Motion's made. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion's made and second. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none. All in favor of approving the May 4th minutes signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Those meeting minutes are approved. Before us, we have one matter referred to the committee. If the clerk will please read that item.
Resolution 2015-0093, a resolution authorizing the use of a portion of the proceeds of the Cuyahoga County Sales Tax Revenue Bonds, Series 2014, County Facilities Improvement in an aggregate principal amount not to exceed $14 million for the purpose of paying certain costs of demolition of blighted and nuisance properties and making grants therefore, authorizing other actions related to the use of such proceeds, and declaring the necessity that this resolution become immediately effective.
Very good. And who's here on behalf of the administration? Mr. Surratt?
Good afternoon. Ken Surratt from the Executive's Office. The item before us is essentially just repurposing some of the proceeds from the bond issuance from the end of last year to cover the costs of demolition. The genesis of this, our Director of IT, Jeff Mowry, has found a more cost-effective solution for our data center, which was included in that original bond issuance. What that did was then free up potential dollars that we could use to cover other capital costs, and in this case, demolition. So we spoke to our bond counsel and made sure that this was an appropriate and reasonable use of those funds, and they agreed that it is. So what this $14 million will actually do is allow us to fully fund that first round of the demolition project, the little over $10 million to the cities, as well as the $3 million annual payment that we made to the first annual payment that we'll make to the county land bank. Jeff Mowry's here if you want to have more details about the specifics of the IT project, or I can answer any other questions about the demolition piece. And we ask for your support.
Question for you. This money, we've already bonded this $14 million out, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And the money's already been deposited with the county?
Yes, it has.
Okay. Very good. I have some other questions, but are there questions from members of the committee? Mr. Jones.
Okay. Just to get the big picture, we're striving towards $50 million of demolition dollars. There was $20 million bonded out for the IT use, is that correct? And now we have found a $4 million solution to our IT needs, and this is $14 million that can now be repurposed to demo.
The line item for the data center is 18.7 in the new issuance. There are some, even with the new project, there is about $4.5 million worth of work that still needs to be done. That's capital, so we'll kind of pull that aside, and then the remaining $14 million is what we've asked to be repurposed for the demolition fund.
Okay. I think I would like to hear a little more. I think it's great that we were able to take $18 million and find a purpose, a suitable purpose for simply $4 million, and freeing up 14. I'd like to hear a little more about the $4 million, what that solution is, and how it differs from the original $18 million solution.
Sure, as Jeff's coming up, I'll do a brief intro, but it's changing from doing all of the work ourselves at our current medical examiner's office and building that out, to actually using the state of Ohio as the main resource for our data system. But I'll ask Jeff to tell more.
Good afternoon, Jeff Mowry, Chief Information Officer. I guess to give you a little bit of background, the $14 million bond issuance, we did that in 2014. It was a $14 million bond issuance. 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 It was a $ Kind of at a little higher level, back at the end of December, we found out that the state of Ohio was going to be offering data center hosting services for us. We used the month of January, we invited them to come up and tour our existing data center space that we're currently leasing. In February, we sent a small team down to Columbus to take a look at the data center that the state has. The data center at the state has extremely large data center. It's actually 5 acres of data center space. It's about an acre per floor, and it's about roughly 4 floors. They built it back in the 80s when mainframes were very popular, and the thought was the state would consolidate all of their mainframes to this data center. For a variety of reasons, that never really happened. So the data center space largely became unused. In the 90s, it was converted to office space, and they actually started building offices on some of the floors. One of the floors was actually used for Ohio State band storage gear. So it was a real underutilization of space. The current Governor Kasich put some money into the building last year and upgraded it, and they discovered that if they were to tear down the walls, the office space, and treat it as a true data center, they were saving millions in heating and cooling cost. They made some upgrades to the facility last year, and they have basically a lot of space. So in December they announced that they would offer this to local governments. In February, March timeframe, we went back and forth. I did an on-site visit the first week of March. They gave us some pricing. The pricing we kind of have right now not to exceed about $350,000 a year to host all of our servers. With that pricing, it kind of really blows our business case for the data center project that we were planning to do at the medical examiner's office. We were kind of estimating data center space to be somewhere in the $600,000 to $800,000 a year price range. The state is offering it to us at a remarkably low cost. $350,000 includes power and data center hosting space. So with that information, I just took it forward up through the administration to say, does it really continue to make sense to build out this data center that we were working on when we had such good cost savings to go to the state? I will say that since partnering up with the state on this project, we're in the middle of developing an operating agreement with the state on use of the space. It's currently with the law office. They're just finalizing the details of it now to come forward for approval. But with this space, not only has it opened up data center hosting spaces, but I mentioned to you at the beginning, they have large mainframes at the state of Ohio. We have a large mainframe that we have here today. We are looking at seeing if the state, in addition to data center hosting, even potentially running our mainframe for us, which would save us significant cost as well. It's also opened up some other discussions about things like Oracle licensing that we do on the back end. The state has some better agreements than what we have. It's also opened up a lot of discussion. The state is consolidating all of their IT into this space. In Health and Human Services, which is one of our big areas, many of you may know that the Health and Human Services is rolling out new systems, and they are located in that data center as well. So we think there's some savings to be received in networking cost. If they're on one floor and we're on the other floor, it's a much cheaper cost. So overall, I think it'd be the prudent thing to do to, not continue to spend the money to build out the capital investment. In addition to the capital savings, we have somewhere in the neighborhood of about $500,000 a year, we think, in operational savings that we can get out of the state as well. So it's kind of opened the door for us.
Great. What's the length of the contract?
Right now, we've asked for a
Or at least
20, is it 25-year? 5? So it's a total of 10 years.
10 years for $4 million.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. It's roughly $350,000 for 10 years.
And the rest is
Per year.
for the build out.
The rest, the remaining piece, we held back some money to the in Public Works, they'll probably give you a little more detail. The ME's office needs to have the fire system in the whole building upgraded. There's some American Disabilities Association work that needs to happen. We've asked for additional funding. We're obviously going to connect to the state's network to get us down to Columbus from here. So we've asked to purchase some larger routers and servers. And we've also asked to purchase some things that we call, I don't get too technical, but they're called mainframe channel extenders. We still print here at the county. We still print quite a bit. We print a lot of financial reports. We print checks. We print some information. We print speeding tickets for some communities. So if we move our servers to Columbus, we're going to have to be able to print in Cuyahoga. So we're going to have to buy some extra gear for that.
All right, and logistics, the distance isn't an issue, obviously, for what you're providing.
No, we feel pretty included in that 350,000 is we are going to connect to, the state owns their own private network, much like we have. It's called Ornet. And we will connect to that network to get down there. We did have to work out some logistics with our staff. They're going to give us what we call level 1 support. So if there's an issue with the server, they've got an engineering team that can go in and recycle the servers for us and do some of that work. We had to work out the logistics on how to receive goods. So if we buy a new server and we install it in Columbus, we had to kind of work out how we're going to take owner, who's going to buy off on that. So there's some little details that we had to still work out with the state.
Okay, thank you.
Chairman Greenspan has asked me to take over momentarily. Are there other questions? Councilman Tran.
Thank you. At one point, we were talking about hosting ourselves other communities' activities of the 59 communities. What effect, if any, is it going to have on the ability for us to make some money in the transaction if we're now deferring that?
That's a great question. Thanks for asking that. So that was one of the conditions when we met with the CIO and the Chief Technology Officer at the state. We told them about our regionalization vision. And at this point, what they're going to give us, and the state would be happy to give a tour, is they're going to give us like a cage, basically. So envision a big data center room. We're going to have a cage. Included in our cost, we can host and maintain cities. So we would serve as a sub to the state. So yeah, they have no issues with that.
Okay. And speed?
Speed, we're going to connect to Ornet, which is, Ornet's been kind of a quiet item in the state. It's, you may have heard some press release here about some local private companies doing 100 gig announcements. Ornet's been doing 100 gig for a while now. Governor Kasich announced last year this Ornet network, and I could send you guys a link to it to describe it. It's one of the fastest networks in the country. It connects all of the universities in Ohio, so it connects up here to Cleveland State. It connects Ohio State, all the big Bowling Green, Miami, OU. They all reside on that network. It's a high-capacity network designed for higher education universities that want to transfer large volumes of data.
I wouldn't think they have the same transactional data daily requirements that we do. They're going to have, theirs is going to go in spikes, I would think.
That's true.
How about Hamilton or Franklin, where counties, where are we in relationship to?
We'll be the first big county
Okay.
to go.
Will that guarantee our position on speed then?
I'm
where I was going.
hopeful. I think they're kind of cutting their teeth on us with the county perspective, but they've been, very extremely cooperative. At Councilman Miller's regionalization meeting, we had the state CIO and the state chief technology officer come in, and they gave a presentation, Councilman Tron, on their efforts to regionalization and how this fit into it. So, we seem to have support from the top down, from the state's perspective.
And you got the first contract, and then you got 2 5-year extensions on top of that? Is that what I understood?
Yes.
Okay. And the 2 5-year extensions, Is there a cap on the rates, where they can go and the amount of, I assume it's going to be driven by the amount of communication and bits and bytes we're sending down there and getting back out there. It's probably,
It's actually built on they're billing us by rack space.
but there's no communications charge on top of that?
No, that's included in the rack space.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a great deal.
But that gets me to the 10-year, 5-year extensions on top of that. Are those locked in at what kind of a percentage increase?
I don't think we have any percentage increase. The only, I think, percentage increase that could happen would be if there's a change in power, because, they obviously buy their power. But as far as a rack and lease space, that's all consistent for the next 10.
Okay, and if we wanted to leave, we can leave at any point
Yeah.
if another service type technology should develop. Because we know this is probably not going to be a solution that we're going to be sitting on 12 years from now or 13 years. Something's going to come up differently, more than likely.
Yeah, and I think, probably what we'll start to see is, closer alignment from a technology perspective. With the changes the state's making in health and human services, we've already started to talk to them about like content for the future here. If we want to do content management solutions, they're working on we're working on very similar strategic directions. So kind of at the start of my conversation, I think this opens us up for more cost savings and taking advantage of a larger entity from the state. For example, in software licensing to hardware buys down the road. I think it positions us well.
As much as we talk about regionalization at a county level, it just seems to me the state is just actually pushing a regionalization on a statewide basis, that ultimately we could all be processing claims and all of these things through a central bank, and it would all be processed through the state of Ohio as opposed to individual county basis. You could see that is where it's going to end up ultimately, I would think,
Right.
from an efficiency standpoint.
Right.
Personnel costs, do we have to have anybody on site down there at all?
They're going to have a group, and we met with the team. We did a on-site visit. They have a team. When I was there was probably 12 to 15 engineers that are like level 1 engineering support. They'll be they'll be at they're in like a monitoring type room, with the desk and monitoring the screens, and they're on call 24/7 to help us. In addition, they've got all the built-in security. As you can imagine, they're hosting all the state Ohio Patrol type information, so security is very tight in the building.
Well, assuming that each one gets written as a different agreement, what's our agreement as far as uptime response? If when the day comes, it's going to go down. What's the response commitment to us? I mean, is it-
I'd have to go back.
Is it a
and
5-minute
check.
response? Is it
Yeah,
a 5-hour? Is it, whatever? And because that's obviously when we're going to be out of business for that period of time.
Yeah, and I can get that detail. I don't know right off the top of my head if it's 5 minutes or 2 minutes. We'll have monitoring. They'll be monitoring it. Plus, we'll also have monitoring services tied to the ORNet component. So I mean, I can get you the details on the monitoring piece.
Sheriff's Department will be online here with this also? Will this be
Yes.
part of this? So the sheriff, in theory, if we go down, which it's only a matter of time, we all know that, that's just part of communications. We're going to be dependent upon Columbus to get the sheriff's department back up online, whatever length of time. So that, I would like to know what the downtime commitment is, because that's, however tight you write that is however much the cost gets affected directly.
Sure. I mean, I think it too from your experience. More and more of the support is done remotely anyway. So I mean, that'll still be the same. If the outage occurred, it would typically, from a facility perspective, I'm thinking that it will be, extremely robust based on the facility requirements that they have that we saw. It is basically a tier 3 data center.
It's when the outage takes place.
Yeah.
It's what is their, I mean, they have them, they're going to have all their clients stacked up in a pecking order, and the one that's paying the highest with the highest response is you're going to get first service, and the one that say I can live with 2 or 3 hour response is going to be someplace down in the lower cost. But I'd like to know where we are as a
Okay.
county. If we're the first ones at the dance, the first county,
yeah.
I think we ought to be in a position to request suggest as high of service as possible. And my last question, bond counsel, where are they in regards to giving an opinion in regards to these funds were designed and geared for a different purpose, and now we're going to repatriate the funds for a different purpose here. What's the bond counsel's opinion on it?
Yeah, bond counsel's opinion is this is okay. We do need to take the step to actually repurpose those funds that were allocated back in November, December. And that's why we have this resolution before you. So the only way that we can actually use the 14 million for demolition is if council approves this resolution that's before us. And also importantly, we had not obviously spent the money. We issued the bonds back in December, but we had not actually spent the money on the data center yet. So that gave us the ability to repurpose these funds through this resolution. So,
But staying on the bond itself, the buyers who bought these in good faith, this was not a purpose which those buyers of those bonds bought this for.
right, but that's still okay. We will do, I forget the exact wording, but we will do something on the official statement that gets issued. But the people that purchase the bonds are okay with it. This is not a material or a significant issue to them.
And so we have that in right. I'm not sure how you can make the determination sitting there that the buyers who bought in good faith are okay with this, unless you actually went to the individual buyers and said, hey, are you okay that we use these for these purposes that were intended for county facilities that we're going to be occupying versus now we're going to be using them for demolition?
Well, they're okay with it because their interest rate or none of that stuff is changing at all. So it's fine from their standpoint. They're still getting, county bonds. They're still, from their standpoint, it's all the same. We just are doing this resolution, frankly, as it may sort of be overkill, quite frankly, just to make sure that we for sure can put that 14 million into demolition.
Who is bond counsel on this one?
It's Calfee.
Okay, and we have that in writing from Calfee that the buyers of these who bought in good faith, this is outside the scope of what they bought these bonds for, I would have thought, and now we're going to repurpose them.
Right.
Do we have the right to actually pay these bonds off today without any recourse? If we wanted to use these same funds, instead of extending our credit limit for the county, we no longer need them for this purpose, to just go ahead and pay these back without finding a repurposing and putting them into the demolition fund.
I think there's a period of time that we have to wait before we can pay back the bonds. It might be like at the earliest 10 years or so.
Well, that's what I'd like to find out before we vote on this, because I'd like to see whether or not that's a good use of taxpayers' money, is to pay back. I mean, like a lot of us, we pay back our homes, we pay back things on an accelerated basis as opposed to extending, because we no longer need it for the intended purpose that these bonds were floated for.
Right, but this purpose, we're not looking to buy it back, we're looking to repurpose it.
No, I understand that, but one of the other purposes could be just to pay these bonds off, could it not?
Oh, I suppose that, well, I think we'd have to wait 10 years. I'll get you the exact number of years, and, because I'm thinking off, it was December when we issued those bonds. But I want to say that the earliest we can pay off these particular bonds that were issued in December is 10 years. But I'll get you something, I'll shoot you an email.
In December, when we were floating these bonds, at what point did we know that this was going to be a potential option for us? No, I don't care, whoever answers, somebody,
We didn't really know what the pricing looked like until probably February timeframe.
did we know this was coming up as an option, that the state was going to step into this role?
One of my managers attended a meeting in December, it was like January timeframe is when we really found out about it, it's when we really, so we just missed the timing on it.
I'd like to find out when we went out and decided to borrow the money, because that's essentially what we did, we borrowed the money for this project. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Miller, then Mr. Jones.
Mr. Chairman, to Mr. Surratt. Can you tell me, to try to get the bigger picture, what's the expected time frame for the next round on demolition, and what would be the means of funding?
Sure. To the councilman through the chair. The second round is actually opened up May 1st for applications. These are for new applicants. So anyone who did not apply in round one is able to apply now. And so the deadline for that is the end of this month. So we'll find out if any new cities come in. In addition to that, it opens up the window for those who did apply in round one. Those who applied in round one, the way the original legislation was written, is that they have to have 80% of their proceed orders in before they can apply for the next round. So in terms of how much is next, I don't have a number just yet. We will have more information by the end of this month when the first round applications come in, and I'm sure as you can imagine, a lot of at least a handful of the round one applicants will be replying as well.
And if a community in round one got less than the $1 million maximum, are they able to apply for the difference regardless of what the status is on how much of round one is completed?
The maximum for round two, and this is for those who applied in round, is $2 million. So they can apply up to the $2 million, up for as high as $2 million.
My question is, suppose a community received $500,000 in round one, are they able to apply for the difference regardless of how far they are along, or is that 80% rule in effect regardless of how much they contracted for in the first round?
The 80% is in effect regardless.
And what's the anticipated funding mechanism for this round?
For round two, that's still to be determined. We definitely need to speak with our fiscal officer to talk about what's next. If we have to go back out to the market, that is an option. There's been talk of other ways to do a short term, maybe a potential line of credit. But I think ideally, the way we can do it is hopefully find some savings from our operations to help cover this would be our first choice.
And just a comment that the we've had discussion about the constraints on the county's bonding capacity, and the 14 million repurposing allows us to fund an item that we otherwise would have had to probably find some kind of debt or credit financing for, which would have taxed that capacity. So it puts us farther ahead and seems to me a favorable situation. Thank you.
Mr. Jones.
What was the dollar amount of the first round in total? Does 14 million cover it all, or is more needed?
It does. So there's $10,045,390 awarded to the cities, plus $3 million for the land bank. So that leaves, about $955,000 or so of the 14 unused.
And back to the bond council line of questioning. Give me bond council 101. When those individuals who purchase the bonds, are they purchasing it based on a particular project, or are they purchasing it based on the strength of the county and our credit rating and AAA ratings? And give us a sense of what factors those individual investors have before they make their decision to purchase.
So for the bonds we issued in November, December of last year, those were all for capital improvements for various purposes. So there were a number of different capital improvements that were included in that particular deal. This demolition is still considered a capital improvement. The only thing is in all of the documents that we did back in November, December, we never included anything that said demolition. So out of an abundance of caution, we're going to do this resolution that makes it clear that we can repurpose this for demolition. And so the major thing that the invested, and then secondly, the major thing the investors are looking for, obviously, is our bond rating and the position, the financial position of the county, and of course, the interest rate on the bonds. Those are the key components. And those are not changing. This is still a capital improvement, so it's no, it's not a material change in the deal. It's just out of we just want to make sure, out of an abundance of caution, that we can use this for demo, and that's why we're doing this resolution.
So I get it. So ultimately, this council is not handcuffed to a $18 million IT project. We can, in good conscience and with doing our due diligence, make a decision if we find a way to be even more fiscally responsible with our monies. If we can accomplish our goal for $4 million and impact demolition that has the intention of slowing the drop in tax, property value loss, which adds to our increase of tax dollars, then we're being, I would say, even more fiscally responsible and more accountable to the community with these type of decisions if we decide to support them.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes, Ms. Brown, and then Mr. Sharon.
Thank you. I'm a little bit unclear as to how we went out and solicited the municipalities to submit applications for funds we did not have, or it seems like we're looking for money and we found money to supply the first round. Was the $50 million not already approved? Can someone clarify that for me?
I'll take a shot at this. So the legislation to create a fund for $50 million was passed, I guess, last fall sometime. The funding mechanism for that had not yet been defined. Again, there were options of including it in some sort of bond issuance, some sort of line of credit, all options that we have available to us. This was, and I think ones that we would have pursued had we not been able to find this additional $14 million. So as we're going out, those are still options available to us. But we definitely have, I believe, funding that can cover that in an interim basis. But we clearly want to make sure that we keep our reserves whole. So we'll look for some other option in order to fund this project going forward. Does that answer your question? No.
Okay, we'll move on to Mr. Sharon, and I can offline give you a little background.
Yeah, and this is for council. If I understood you correctly, you said that it's not a problem to retroactively go back and change what was in a piece of legislation that authorized the sale of the bonds when the bond buyers bought them. You're saying that retroactively, you, or at least your council is telling us it's okay to retroactively go after the transaction's already taken place, somebody's already bought them, and we go back and change the purpose for which it was originally passed.
Right, it's still considered capital, so it still fits within the purpose.
Okay, and again, I'd love to see that, because we're the ones voting on this when all's said and done, and we rely on bond council's opinion. So I'd like to see that, because it sets it up that if we can change it retroactively for this one, what stops a buyer to worry about us retroactively changing a purpose in the future on something else that they might buy a year, 2 years, 10 years afterwards, if that is acceptable in this particular case. So I'd like to see both of those addressed in there.
Okay, I'll send you something for sure.
I want complete clarity on this. As Ms. Brown was talking about, the $50 million, is this reducing that commitment of the $50 million down to now $36 million?
Yes.
Okay, so we're not talking in any way possible, they're talking $64 million.
No, no, not at all.
All right, thank you. Mr. Jones?
Did it help? Okay.
And to that, I'm still following Jack's line of thinking. I'm back to that bond rating. When I think about the critical factors, it's our local economy, the big picture. There's only so much we can do. Just the revenue outlooks of this county, just our practical financial management, how we, the sober decisions this council makes. So as I think about, that's what you're offering us, saying we have the right to make a sober decision and not say we're retroactively going back and changing something in a fundamental way that in a way misleads those who have bought. No, they're looking at our capacity, our bond rating and the strength of this county. Does this board make sober decisions? That's how they're basing our bond rating and making those purchases. Is that fair?
That's correct.
So again, it's still well within our wheelhouse if we make do our due diligence and make decisions. It's not going back. It's moving forward in a sober way. So.
Okay.
Right, and I think one of the critical issues to look at this is we are not issuing any more debt or adding any more money. We're actually, we're just repurposing the portion that was already approved. So it's still capital improvements, and we're not issuing anything more than the amount not to exceed that we did back in November, December. And just out of an abundance of caution, we just want to add the word, demolition to the resolution.
Okay, very good. Thank you for that. Oh,
I
Mr.
just
Jones,
add
yes, sir.
one feather in our cap. I think our council oversight and management were very high marks in our bond rating. Is that right? Okay.
All right, thank you. Just a question, the status of the data center contract, I had to step away and I apologize, maybe that was addressed, but where, I heard Mr. Mowry said it was presented to legal for review. Where are we in the process?
So it just, I think legal just wrapped it up right last week. So the state, I believe, is the first signer, and then we bring it forward to you for signature. So it's, I'm going to go on a limb and say a few weeks away before it would come come forward for approval.
Okay, the reason I ask is, my concern is that if we've dedicated funds for the data center, the $18 million, and forgetting in the source, whether it's a TAN or a bond or however we've dedicated the funds have been dedicated for that purpose. If we go ahead in advance of the agreement with the state that's going to save us the $14 million, not executed, and let's say for some reason that contract doesn't happen, we then are effectively in a situation where we've appropriated funds out of its originally intended purpose, and then we're going to have to try to identify where those funds are coming from. I guess maybe at the end of the day, it doesn't matter because we've already committed roughly $14 million to demo at one point, and we're going to have to find money for that anyhow. But I get a little uncomfortable when we talk about redirecting funds or repurposing or reappropriating funds for one purpose to another in anticipation of something happening. If we're this close to this taking place, meaning the state sign off on the contract and we ratify, and then we come back, not ratify, but we approve it, is it mission critical that we move on this today, this resolution, or can we wait 2 weeks in anticipation of the state contract moving forward and being presented to council for its review?
I think one of the critical elements of this particular legislation is that the first invoice related to demo expenses, I think, comes out in June. So before we can spend money on demolition, it's legal's opinion that we need to get this resolution passed so that for sure we can use some money for demo.
But we could always do a temporary use of reserves in the interim while we're waiting for the contract to come through to satisfy that obligation.
Well, as far as the money right now is sitting in the bond fund account,
Right, but to Mr. Schron, and I guess where Mr. Jones, was, that money has currently been dedicated to a data center project. And until we have a contract executed to transfer that activity, as we're talking about, to the state, we still have dedicated funds for a specific purpose. And my challenge and I understand what we're trying to do. It's not an issue of not wanting to do this or not understanding it. It's the timing of things. I would anticipate that you would have a contract with the data center signed, or at least presented at the same time you're presenting this legislation, so that the two go hand in hand. Meaning, we execute the agreement and then we turn around and reappropriate the funds. We're being asked to reappropriate funds in advance of a contract. And if it appears that we're as close to executing the contract as we are, and we have reserves that we could utilize on a temporary basis, at least to satisfy the first invoice that comes through. That's why I'm just asking, would it not be prudent to wait 2 weeks, hold this item in committee for 2 weeks in anticipation that the state contract move forward?
Certainly, that's an option. The way this resolution is written is it specifically deals with the 14 million that will go into demolition. So it's leaving the 4.7 million that'll be used for the IT purposes in place and intact.
But if for some reason, I don't mean to interrupt, but if for some reason the state contract falls apart, which I don't think, from what I'm hearing, that would happen, but if it was to fall apart, then we would have appropriated the 14 million that was originally dedicated, pursuant to Mr. Schron's line of of discussion, dedicated for the data center, the county's own data center. We've appropriated 75% of it somewhere else. Contract falls apart, then we are left in a situation where we now have to find the 14 million that we've just appropriated to another purpose.
Well, I think no matter what we do, we're going to need 4.7 million for an IT purpose. So whether it's a contract with the state or if it's a contract with some other entity, so say that the contract with the state falls through, we're still going to need some money for IT purposes in the neighborhood of 4.7 million, one way or the other, whether it's the state or just pick vendor A that's out there. I think that's not going to change, is my understanding of it. Jeff, you can weigh in.
I don't know if I have a strong opinion one way or the other. I'm not as close to how the money's used in the bonding and perspective, but I know that the state CIO is clearly behind it, Stu Davis, and I don't foresee any issues from an IT perspective with the contract, but there's risk with everything. I'm not sure I have an opinion one way or the other.
I'll weigh in.
Mr. Jones?
I'll weigh in, Mr. Chairman. I know how to juggle. I don't know how to juggle, but I can juggle with two balls. And we got two right here. We have $14 million in demo that if we delay, those applications have already gone out. And we have $4 million for IT contract. And if there's no major concerns with the IT department, I say we keep juggling both, and that would be my recommendation, thought.
Okay. Mr. Schron?
We just found out that this was going to be a solution in December. We had authorized the $50 million to go forward before that time. And so how are we intending to pay for that? This first round, it wasn't going to be coming out of this windfall. It was intended to be coming through the sources where we already had the funds. So I'm having a hard time understanding. I'm having a hard time understanding where this is, why all of a sudden we've got to find the only source is the windfall, as opposed to what we had already laid out, set out a game plan, and we're going to do $50 million, and now we've got a $10 million windfall. We're being told that we have to have this 10 million, as opposed to the 50 million we'd already authorized. I'm having a hard time if the legal department can explain, because this did not exist as an option until December. We didn't have it until it finally percolated as a real viable solution until February, March is what I'm hearing. And yet we told people to go out, solicit, get funds, get demos, get projects, get everything like that, without knowing that this windfall was going to take place. I assume we were planning on paying for that through other sources. Because we knew the $10 million number a long time ago in regards to this, that was what was coming in as far as the first round of demos.
Right, Councilman Shaw, I believe the answer is this was, the demo fund was always envisioned and being created by increasing some sort of debt. I think there's definitely been voices or concerns voiced about increasing our debt capacity. So I think we've looked for alternative solutions before we tried to go down those routes. So that is, I think, is the administration's approach to this. We clearly don't want to take on any more debt if we don't have to, and that's what we're trying not to do. And this presented itself as just one of the ways that we were able to get to there quicker.
And from my perspective, look, I get it, I understand. I'm kind of in between my two colleagues here on this point. But I think to be consistent, we with, as it relates to the city of Cleveland, whether it be Public Square, whether it be the bridge, the pedestrian bridge, or the jail, we have said to them, we will only move forward after council is satisfied with the agreement. And that relates to the appropriation of funds. I think it'd be disingenuous if we held ourselves accountable to a different standard. I'd like to see the agreement before we decide we're going to, an agreement to appropriate funds for a dedicated purpose, away from that dedicated purpose, till that agreement is executed.
I think we can make that work.
So, look, if between now and, we could play this one of two ways. We can move this, in my opinion, move this out of committee for second reading on Tuesday. And if between now and then an agreement is not presented, we can make an amendment on the floor or just defer the item until an agreement is made. Or we can make an amendment, just as we've done with Cleveland, to be fair, once again, in our own methodology, that we will only move this forward once we're satisfied with the agreement with the state, which is evidently illegal now. So it doesn't seem like we're too far off in timing. But I think we need to be, my perception is we need to be consistent with what we're doing. We've agreed in the past not to fund pending an agreement with an outside body. I think we believe we should, the outside body here being the state instead of the city of Cleveland, I think we should be consistent with that. So, we can go one of two ways. We can either move this forward in anticipation that between now and next Tuesday, an agreement will be executed or prepared by the state, or we can hold it in committee for 2 weeks and give the county and state a little more time. The money's there. Look, I'm not worried about making the first invoice
I agree.
to a community, because we'll just do a temporary use of reserves and take care of that. So my concern isn't with that. The money is there. My concern is we've set a precedent of ensuring that contracts are in place before we appropriate funds. We're being asked to do that here, appropriate funds in advance of a contract. And I'm a little uncomfortable in doing so based on our past experiences.
And based on your options, I wouldn't be opposed to having this delayed two more weeks.
Okay, well, Mr. Sharon.
You said it's illegal. Having seen stuff in my own business go into legal, does that mean you actually signed off on the document in its final form right today, or are we still in negotiating Ts and Cs?
My understanding of it is it's been sent down to the state, so our legal's already reviewed it. I'm not personally the one on the IT aspect, but it's been sent to the state, and we're waiting to hear back from the state's attorneys. And maybe Jeff maybe be able to speak to a little bit more.
I'd be shocked if we didn't make a change in the document from some terms.
My guys would tell me that both legal departments have bought off on it. So
Oh.
I think now it'll be going through the,
Okay.
there's a check by the procurement department, OBM, and I think there's another legal check after that before it would come forward to you.
That gives me a lot more warm fuzzy, because if it's in legal, that doesn't mean it's
Yeah.
out of legal. And so if it's out of
So
legal both sides, then I'm
So I think holding it, or however you guys want to handle that would be fine.
I'm Mr. Jones.
I'm concerned about the $14 million for the demolition fund and the administration's process for completing those applications and getting the dollars into the hands of the community. we need to know what your timeline and if anything we're discussing now disrupts your timeline. I have no problem with the window for doing our due diligence, but we don't want to, I'm not of the mind to disrupt the process that's been outlaid for the demo process.
Right, I think as Councilman Greenspan said, we can use some sort of temporary reserves in order to fund what comes in over the next month or so. Just to refresh your memory, we pay based on a reimbursement basis. So, Cleveland and Euclid are the only two under contract during May that will probably submit June invoices. Be probably a small amount of money. Cleveland's actually started knocking down houses, Euclid hasn't. So it'd be a very small amount of money that has to come out in the short term. We don't expect, to be paying out larger sums of money for a couple more months, as most of the contracts start June 1st and they won't be invoiced until July 15th. So we have some time here in order to figure this out before we start paying larger sums of money.
And last, it's been discussed briefly, but in terms of the IT contract, is that really a bond? Is that really the determining factor for this process, either moving forward or falling through the cracks? I've heard it's in legal. When are you confident that this process is going to take place, that this project will take place?
From an IT perspective, we work with legal departments. My guys just told me that both legal teams have agreed to the agreement. Like I said, it'll go through the fiscal and the law process. There's multiple checks that it goes through before it comes forward. We'll try and, I'll continue to work with the fiscal department to try and, move this along in a timely fashion. Overall, we're trying to make the move happen. Our target date is that long weekend in October. We have a holiday. It's like a 3-day week, so we're looking to try and make the move. That weekend is our target weekend to move.
Which weekend again?
It's like October 15th. I think it might be Veterans Day or Columbus Day. That holiday weekend is the weekend we're looking to make the move.
So I guess what I really don't want to hear is that July 15th comes around and we don't have a signed contract.
Oh, I see.
Or, if that's in any way a factor, you haven't said that it is. But that's my main concern.
I see.
That we keep this demolition process on track, and that you have a confidence level with the needs, your IT needs.
Yeah.
That they're being met, so that I can in good conscience vote to move forward.
Yeah, no, we have high confidence in that. That the state will come through, and like I said, we're targeting the October timeframe. I'm a little uneasy to give you an exact time as to when the contract will get done, because that's a little out of my control. It goes through the fiscal. Like I said, it goes through multiple steps before it comes forward. But I got to believe with the attention on this that it would move quickly for approvals.
In the next 2 weeks, as the chairman has mentioned, considering holding for 2 weeks, is there something going to happen? Will you have something more than what you have today?
We could send a draft copy of the agreement, after this meeting to you, if that would be helpful. I mean, if that puts you a little more at ease.
That would be great if you would just send it through the clerk, and then the clerk will make it available to members of council if anyone wishes to review it.
Okay. All right.
All right, Mr. Miller?
Mr. Chairman, I don't see that the 2 weeks creates any problem. But the one concern that I want to express is that all indications are, and we saw it at my committee meeting last week, and we've seen it throughout the process. All indications are that the state is being very helpful, very collaborative, very very positive in this whole process, and we wouldn't want to do anything to change that. I think it's very important that that from our end that we put forward a very, very positive working atmosphere and keep what seems to be a good thing on track. Thanks.
Okay, very good. Then with unless there's any further discussion, we'll just hold this in committee for 2 weeks. If whomever, law department or IT, would send a copy of the draft over to the clerk, to members of the committee, it'll be available upon your request of the clerk to receive the document. The expectation is that within the next 2 weeks, the state will do their approvals. It'll come back to the county. And then we'll be able to move forward. I think this is a consistent fashion with how we've moved forward with documents, especially as it relates to the appropriation of funds, that we're satisfied as a county that we have reviewed the information underlying the request. Okay, very good. The next item on the agenda, Madam Clerk.
Cuyahoga County Emergency Operations Center.
Great, thank you. I know, is Mr. Gallagher, or is he available? Okay, thank you. Sheriff, you'll always be my sheriff. So nothing against Sheriff Pinckney, but you're the sheriff.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chairman Greenspan and Council. I'm Frank Bova, Chief Community Safety and Protection Officer with Cuyahoga County. The majority of the persons that are touching the EOC project have joined me today. They're behind me. The EOC Emergency Operations Center is a location used for multi-agency coordination of information and resources to support incident management activities. EOC's focus on the response to and short-term recovery from an incident, natural or unnatural. The core function of the EOC includes coordination, communication, resource allocations, and tracking, along with info collection, analysis, and dissemination related to any emergency. This, along with CCOM's dispatch and the dispatching for several other cities in Cuyahoga County and the Office of Emergency Management, would be brought to this facility. And that was the reason for this vision. In March of 2014, an opinion of probable cost came in at $16.9 million, and I'm going to be rounding off numbers as we're going. When this came in, a request for capital appropriations was made for roughly $18 million to this council. In October of 2014, the estimate cost for construction changed to $21.4 million. This, I believe, it might be where the breakdown is. It was never presented to anyone at this point. When we entered the picture, most of the members of the team are newer on my side of the aisle. It was brought to our attention that the cost had gone up to $23.5 million, and that was with several add-ons that were added on. As I stand here today, with the help of Carrie Ash and the Shook team, who have been wonderful, and our county team, the price, as we're standing here today, is back down to $20,098,000. And the integrity and function of the building has not been compromised. And with your permission, I'd like to bring up Brandy to continue this conversation.
Sure, thank you.
Good afternoon, Council. Brandy Carney with Public Safety. A few slides here that we have, and then we can take any questions that you have regarding the project. As Chief Bova said, or a little bit of background for emergency management being such a large emergency management organization, you know, the largest in the state, Cuyahoga County. Right now, we do not have a designated emergency operations center, so it always has been a large identified need within the county. Currently, my emergency management or our emergency management offices are out of Courthouse Square, and our CCOMS, which is the 911 center for Cuyahoga County, is out of the Sterling building, so two separate locations. This new building would in fact bring both administrative offices to a single location, as well as a consolidated dispatch center and the emergency operations center to handle events, as Chief Bova just discussed. As he said, the current budget for this project is at $20,098,434. What we'd like to provide is a brief project kind of timeline and background. This project has been going on for some time, and there's been a lot of different numbers that people have heard. So hopefully we'll be able to provide some clarity over the last year and a half timeline. Starting with May of 2013, at that time, the city of Broadview Heights hired Branstetter Carroll to provide schematic design for this project. Broadview Heights did do an RFQ prior to hiring Branstetter Carroll. They did interview 3 firms, and the county did participate on that interview process with them. Branstetter Carroll, they were hired again for.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, I'm sorry.
who are the other two?
The other 2 firms?
Yes.
I apologize, Councilman, I do not know that.
One was URS, I know that. I don't know who the other one was.
I know they interviewed 3, again, one was URS, but I do not know the third. I can find out for you.
And this is an RFQ?
It was an RFQ that was put out by the city of Broadview Heights.
Right. And Branstetter Carroll's qualifications in building such a facility were?
Broadview Heights selected Branstetter Carroll for the schematic design for this. There was county representation. They're no longer with the county, but there was county representation on that. But the city of Broadview Heights was the ultimate decision maker, and they did hire Branstetter Carroll for the project.
Thank you.
And just, if I can interrupt, so just to provide, I had prepared a memo, which each of you has, which outlines some of what Ms. Carney is going to be discussing, but provides some detail on the discussion, the background, and some of the facts that you'll be presented as well. So you have that in your package. I'm
So
sorry.
at that time, that's okay. At that time, the county did in fact reimburse the city of Broadview Heights. It was 80-20 was decided on, so the entire Branstetter Carroll contract was $200,000. The county reimbursed $160,000 to the city for that contract. Additionally, the city of Broadview Heights hired Turner Construction for construction management services. Again, with the 80-20 principle, we reimbursed them $18,800. So those were 2 reimbursements that went to the city. Again, that was May of 2013. There's a year that passes. In March of 2014, Branstetter Carroll did in fact provide the project cost estimate to the county. At that time, the cost estimate that was provided was $16,953,899. So again, at that time, it was approximately $17 million project that was provided, and that was a probable cost estimate that was provided to the county.
And if I may, that did not include the technology, correct?
At that time, it did include the
It did
technology.
include.
Yes, it
okay,
did.
all right.
June of 2014, so about 2 months later, there was an internal memo within public safety requesting a capital appropriation for this project for $18 million. At that time, the reason was the approximately $17 million we just discussed, as well as another $1 million in contingency and fees, because there were other fees that were included, for example, Branstetter Carroll fees and some other fees. So that capital appropriation that was requested was $18 million. However, of that $18 million, $3 million was earmarked out of the wireless fund. That's a separate fund that 911 receives. So in later that year, when we received the capital appropriation, the total capital was $17,857,000 and some change. But again, $3 million of that was earmarked from wireless. Just trying to lay everything out because there has been a lot of different numbers that have came across. Moving forward, Ginger from Public Works, just going to go through a couple slides here.
Ginger Cox, I'm the Chief Facilities Design and Construction Engineer for the Department of Public Works. I'm going to put this up a bit. So the next thing that happened was in July of 2014, and the county contracted with BCI for $4,904 to act as the county criteria architect and to also be the architect of record for the civil site construction. That was done through a justification which was a resolution that went through the proper process. In October of 2014, BCI provided the schematic drawings and had a cost estimate for the county of $21,476,000. That cost difference from the 16.9 was actually based on the real schematic drawings. In the beginning, they had used a number from the Broadview Heights project. So now this is a different building. There were programming changes. There was an addition of 5,000 square feet to the building. And some of the other items that were not included in the initial March BCI opinion of probable cost was escalation costs. That estimate was from 2013, and we're building it in 2015. The permits were not included, and they're, I think, $205,000. The site development utility costs were not in that estimate either, and I think that's around 1.5 million. And like I said, there was an increase in building size by 5,000 square feet. So in December, well, let me go back. Those documents, the schematic drawings from BCI, were then put into the contract for the design build contract. And in December of 2014, we went through our design build procurement process, and we hired Shook Construction as a design builder. And that was for a contract lump sum of $2,148,732. That included the construction of the site work, the design build pre-construction services, the architect of record fees, and again, and the civil site, all the civil site work. The reason that we did that was we wanted to have the EOC at that time open before the RNC. And we wanted a jump start on the civil work so that the site could be all ready for the building. The final GMP is yet to be negotiated with the county and Shook, and that will then come back as an amendment to council. So in January of 2015, Shook Construction then provided us an estimate based on a schematic design. So the same documents that BCI provided us, they did an estimate on that. And their estimate was $21,615,686. And BCI's was only $139,000 different from that. In February and March of 2015, we started doing the design development. We held multiple value engineering sessions to reduce costs and add value. And we had a lot of recommendations from Shook's architect of record, which is ADG Design Group, and they are experts in building EOCs. And they had a lot of recommendations to give us on this type of building. So in March and April of 2015, we're doing design development, and then at 50%, design development, Shook provided us another estimate. And with all the recommendations from ADG and all, now this estimate's at $23,528,000. The initial building was changed completely, and I'll have Shook Construction talk about that in a minute here. And like I said, the items from the ADG were added. In April of 2015, the county administration requested that we make cuts while keeping the EOC integrity in place.
Excuse me again, who from the administration made that request?
That came from, I believe Ed Kraus wanted us to.
Mr. Gallagher, Chairman and Mr. Gallagher, I was part of that conversation too. When we realized the cost was at over 23 million, we realized that we had to bring the cost down without hurting the integrity or the functionality of the building.
See, my concern, Mr. Chairman, if you don't mind.
Sure.
My concern is that we have a project here, and there are some definite issues. And there's a lot of things in this county we can cut back on. But the last thing I think that we should be cutting back on in this county is safety. And that's exactly what we're doing. And whether or not the integrity of the building or the integrity of the building and its intended purpose are going to be in some way impacted, I have to be persuaded. The people that are going to persuade me to do that's going to be true is going to be the people that do this for a living. Now, does Shook do this for a living?
ADG,
ADG? Well, that's who's going to, are they here?
yes.
That's who I want to hear from, that these cuts that we're making are not going to in any way impact the integrity of what the purpose of this building has been intended from the beginning. We made a promise to the people of this county, Broadview Heights, and I understand there's a lot of moving parts here, and there's a lot of people that aren't here, that were here, that made decisions that may not, or may or may not have been the best, but those are the folks that I want to hear from as soon as we can. Thank you.
Okay, so the current budget, like I said, is $20,098,434. And today, we anticipate a GMP in mid-June if in fact we can move forward. We have Shook Construction with us today, but you would probably like to talk to ADG first. Am I correct?
Well, let me do this, and let me just say, we have representatives from BCI, from Shook, and from ADG here
Yes, sir, Mo.
to answer questions. So we want to make sure that we fully understand the situation, because I share the same concerns that Mr. Gallagher shares insofar as the sensitivity and the priority. You know, although our charter is specific in some areas, it's fundamental that we provide health and human services, public safety and justice services, as well as economic development, as well as public works. But this is a core mission of the county. This is a big project. It's not only a statement of what we do, but it's a value statement of the priorities of Cuyahoga County. And it's important that we understand this, to understand exactly what the original, this is kind of a divergent process than we're used to, in that Broadview Heights originally contracted with BCI. There are questions that some of us may have that do have a BCI as it relates to that process and their skills and qualifications. Shook is important, as is ADG. So I'm glad we brought everybody here. I want to thank everyone for coming. The intent here is just to fully understand what this is going to look like at the end of the day. Mr. Chairman? Yeah, Mr. Miller.
I think I missed something somewhere. Can you explain who this ADG is and at what point they were brought in and what their function is?
This is a design-build project, so Shook and ADG are part of that design-build team. So Shook hired ADG as their architect of record.
So let's do this. I think we've got a broad overview of where we are and what brought us to at least the numbers. There are some details here that we have that we've not yet gone over, but let's just start bringing up BCI, since they were here from the beginning, involved in the project, and hear from their perspective from the beginning of this project, at least up until now.
Okay, Bruce? Bruce Whitehead from BCI.
Mr. Chairman?
Great. Well, thank you for coming.
Committee, certainly. Do you have specific questions?
Well,
of me, or-
from we've heard an overview of your involvement going back to Broadview Heights. So can you just go ahead and just kind of restate, I'll ask some specific questions, and I'll leave one for Mr. Gallagher that he and I share. But when you originally put this proposal together, to bid on an emergency operations center, did you design, was the specifications from Broadview Heights to build a FEMA quality facility, a FEMA standard facility?
The FEMA aspect of it was, as I recall, not specifically stated.
Okay, what was stated insofar as the standards you were to build the building to, or design the building to?
That was almost 2 years ago, and I don't remember specifically. I can certainly find that, get you a copy of the original solicitation.
That would be, if you could if our clerk would please follow up with Mr. Whitehead to ensure that we receive that document, that would be helpful. But to the best of your recollection, it did not include FEMA, being built to FEMA standards?
To the best of my recollection. And that subject was under constant discussion as we got into the project and as it moved from a Broadview Heights project into a Cuyahoga County project. It was balanced as we went along against budget constraints. And our task and our efforts were to produce an effective, functional, safe facility that met your budget, but did not necessarily comply with all FEMA requirements. And FEMA, ADG can address this in more detail than I can, but the FEMA requirements as such are only requirements, as I understand, if FEMA is funding a project. They have guidelines that we followed to the extent that we could within your budget. And we prepared criteria documents, our own guidelines. The design build team and the architect of record is tasked with fleshing our criteria out into a permitted design.
And so when the project left Broadview Heights and came to the county, what was the process that you were involved, or were you involved in that transition process?
We were involved on an informal basis. We had a contract with Broadview Heights to do the full design of the project. It was not design build at that time. We were only authorized to proceed through the schematic design phase. The fee for that was the $200,000 that Ginger mentioned. We completed that in the summer of 2013. Following that, when negotiations between the county and the city determined that the city was not going to participate, we stayed in touch, we stayed involved. It was informal, we were not under contract, but we did work with members of the Emergency Services Department. We adjusted the program. There had been city facilities in the original building. There was a complete fire station. There were extensive renovations to the police department, all on the same campus. Those things were removed, and the county's program changed. It fluctuated a lot over the 6 months or so, fall and winter of 13 and 14.
So let me interrupt. When you said that you were in discussions, at least informally, with representatives from the county, who was involved in those meetings?
They were led by Norberto Colon.
Okay.
Brandy Carney was involved. When Ken Mills came on board, he was involved. Valerie Proper, former attorney in emergency services, was involved from the beginning until she left the county.
Okay. All right. Yes, Mr. Gallagher.
If you don't mind, who represented the city of Broadview Heights?
Their team was led by Dave Schrodel, economic development. Dave Schrodel.
Does he work for the city?
He's the economic development director for the city. We also worked with their city engineer, their building commissioner.
They didn't have anybody from the outside?
I don't quite understand the question.
They didn't hire anybody from the outside to do any negotiation with you? They did this all in-house?
They did not use anyone to negotiate with me, except city staff. The mayor was involved.
Okay. Did you have anything else to? So that's the process, at least up and through that point.
Yes.
Did you want to? So, insofar as BCI's experience, can you just explain a little bit about your company's background and projects that what's your sweet spot, and what are some things that your company focuses on?
We've been in business for 35 years. We specialize, our work is about 98% public sector, and it is primarily cities and counties, the occasional state project. One of the things we specialize in is public safety. We've designed more than 70 police and fire stations. This is the third emergency operations center we've been involved with.
And what were the other emergency operations centers that you've?
The other two are both for counties in Kentucky. One is Clark County, and the county of the other one escapes me right now, I'm sorry.
So 2 in Kentucky, and then Cuyahoga makes 3?
Yes.
Okay. And when you designed those two previous centers or were involved in those projects, you're saying the FEMA standards were only applicable if FEMA funding was used, but are those FEMA standards considered the gold standard insofar as designing EOCs?
I would say so, yes.
And were those two centers FEMA standard centers?
They were significantly smaller than this one. They didn't contain all the features that this one,
But they were, you said they were?
yes, they were.
And the reason that the Cuyahoga County facility is not to those standards had to do with cost?
That's correct. I wouldn't say that the criteria that we set out for this facility were not up to FEMA standards. We didn't apply all FEMA standards to all portions of the building. So that's what I meant to say earlier.
Okay, but in your previous in the two centers you did build in Kentucky, they was every element to the FEMA standard?
I believe so, yes.
And so you're saying that the reason that in Cuyahoga County you didn't build to FEMA standards had to do with budget constraints? Or if that's not the case, then why did you decide here not to?
Let me elaborate a bit.
Okay.
The major elements of the project, as we set forth the schematic design, the EOC itself, it's a large room for emergency operations, and CCOMS, Emergency Communications Facility. Those are concentrated in a rectangle in the center of the building. Those represented the essential facility, and that was, the criteria for that were written to current FEMA standards. Connected to that was a special operations section, which was basically a storage facility for emergency vehicles. And then an administration section, which had a meeting room, a media room, some other media facilities, and administrative office spaces for EOC and CCOM staff. Those were not considered essential facilities after discussion with the county staff that we were working with. And the criteria for those were written to be of a lesser standard than the EOC itself, if that makes sense.
What county staff were you talking to that made those decisions?
It's the same group that I mentioned before, primarily Norberto Colon.
Okay. Mr. Schron.
My understanding is you're involved with primarily public sector, so we just heard that permits were not something that was factored into budgetary considerations. Is that normal, that permits would not be something you think about when doing the scope of a costing for a project?
I wouldn't say it's normal, but in this case, when we were working with Broadview Heights, and it was a Broadview Heights project, Broadview Heights was not going to charge itself fees.
Okay, so it's normal that permits would be included as a cost of doing business to build a building?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Is it normal that site utility costs of whether, we know that we're having a monumental cost here with the public square, the utilities and undergrounds and all that. Is it normal that getting the cost of the power, the water, the sewage, all those utility costs would be something that would be factored into a site cost ultimately to do a site?
It is, and we had a number in that budget for site costs. As it turns out, it was far too low.
Okay, so I thought I heard that site costs were not included, but what you're saying is that they were just under budgeted as opposed to not included at all?
That's how I would state it, yes.
You had a space holder for site costs, but it was not close to whatever the costs were going to be?
Well, there was a number there, yes.
Yeah,
but
yeah,
it was
there
too
was a
low.
space holder within the quote. The 5,000 square feet, the addition that was put into the scope of this, did you help create the program document that was actually the foundation to which the building would be at least started from, with the bubble diagrams or whatever techniques of programming was done?
Yes, we did.
Okay, and the 5,000 square foot addition that was added later on, was that adding to the programs, or was it something that was left out of the program when you're laying out the game plan for whatever the building's gonna look like? And I've been around a building before, and the first thing you do, the bubbles, and you do all that before you even have any walls. Was whatever was going to go into that 5,000 square feet, was that an additional scope or was it missed?
It was additional scope, and to be clear, it wasn't an item of 5,000 square feet that was attached to the building. It was incremental growth across the project. There were some additional functions added. But in the profession, we refer to it as scope creep.
Okay, and back to my colleague's question, Kuchi Cat, and I love it because he keeps asking the same format. Who was the one who created a scope creep of 5,000 square feet? That's a pretty good size creep.
I couldn't lay that at any individual's feet, I'm afraid.
Well, having, again, build buildings, there's always a, well, what if? Might as well, as long as we're doing this type attitude. As long as we're doing this, we might as well. And all of a sudden, the scope creep just keeps adding things to it. Somebody has to be signing off on that, because that's a big ticket, adding 5,000 square feet.
Do you, I'll just follow.
Well, somebody's got to be adding it. It's either Broadview Heights is saying it, the county, or together they're saying it. Who is the one that,
Broadview Heights was out of the picture at that point.
so they were no longer, they could not be responsible for the scope creep?
For a good portion of the time that occurred, the county was looking at another site in a different city, in which we helped evaluate 2 sites in Independence, in fact, which we helped evaluate during that gray period between our 2 contracts.
So if we look at the original scope of the bubble program document, that was the foundation to which you start then building a building around, we would not find much in the way of additional program if we look at the building as it stands today on the program. It's just increasing in size. We didn't add new programs. We didn't miss something major. We didn't have any oopses from that document to where we currently are.
Well, where we currently are, we've backed off of that 5,000 square feet is gone now. It's been removed, and a good bit more has been removed in the value engineering discussions that have taken place this year.
But you're incrementally moving that out of every single segment, because you're saying there's not a room that's like this that we could say we're going to cut this 5,000 square foot chunk out of it.
If you're referring to the 5,000 square feet that was added during, no, there was not a single 5,000 square foot space.
A little here and a little there, that
Yes.
we're doing de minimis scope creep. We're pulling it back out of it all over throughout the project.
Well, I mentioned the special operations portion of the building, the vehicle storage facility, that has been removed. That was there from the beginning, but in the current,
Wait a second. That is a building piece that you're taking out. So the special vehicle storage is no longer part. It was in the beginning of a solution. It's not in the solution today. Is that?
that's correct.
Whether it's good or bad, I just want to make sure I'm
That's
understanding.
correct, right.
The program had it in it.
The budget
program does not have it.
descriptions, the budget descriptions that have been made so far in this meeting, where we started at 17 million, went up to 23 million, we're now back to 20 million in round numbers.
Yeah, and let me interrupt. So let me explain kind of where I want this to go. So I want to first of all, for us to understand where we started, then when Shook came in and ADG, and then where we are now insofar as the reductions in scope, which is where you're going.
Where I start.
So I'm trying to walk us through to get to those parts. I guess unless I know Mr. Miller had a question, but before I go to Mr. Miller, just one question on the BCI component, and then I'd like Shook to come up in ADG and talk, and then we'll move into the final reduction phase.
Sure.
When these scope creep, these increases in scope discussions happened, I know, and Mr. Schron can attest to this, when I've done this, not to the extent he has, but when I've been involved in building design, when we've had scope changes, someone has had to sign off a document authorizing you as the vendor to either design or build, in this case design, the discussed change, because specifications had to be laid out. Do you have any documents like that? Here's where I'm going. Whoever approved, I want to make sure in this project, and I'm jumping to kind of my statement at the end. I want to make sure who's ever been involved in this, that took it from where it is to from where it was to where it is no longer involved in making decisions like that for the county. End of story. So, we had a meeting 2 weeks ago. I said, I'm pointing fingers because this is enough. So I want to know at the county, who authorized the scope change? And you're saying it was a committee decision. Well, someone at the end of the day had to sign a document authorizing you to conduct additional work. I want to know who did that.
Well, Mr. Chairman, the literal answer to your question is that there was no document signed because if for no other reason than we were not working under contract.
So did we pay you for any additional work that you did based on those additional, at this point, I'd assume unauthorized scope changes?
When our contract was signed in July of last year, it was based on a proposal that I submitted that included costs to cover the work that we had done in the previous 6 months.
So any work so if there wasn't, so you had a defined scope of work, services to be performed. Any of these changes that were made after that, which you're saying you have no documentation that authorized the work to be performed, nobody authorized the change to be made, did we pay you then for that work? Did you invoice us? So if we said build building A and we came back and said we'd like you to build building A1, and you said and you designed work on A1, but nobody signed off on it, an original contract said you were only to work on this specific block A building, did we pay you for work you did that you're saying you had no written authorization to do? I guess the answer by your silence is yes.
No, I'm not agreeing with that.
Okay.
We did not have a contract with the county. We had a relationship with the county that grew out of the contract we had with Broadview Heights. When we fulfilled that contract with Broadview Heights, we continued to offer advice to county personnel. During that period of offering advice, these changes that we're discussing occurred.
Is advice free?
Excuse me?
Is advice free?
No, well, sometimes it's
How about this
in
time?
its use worth what you pay for it in that case.
How about this time?
Well, as I mentioned, as I tried to explain, when I did submit a fee proposal to the county to become criteria architect for the project, I included costs, I included fees from you to cover the work that we had done during that period of advice. But during that period, there was no contract, there was no basic framework to issue for a document to be signed under to make changes. Does that make sense?
This is very troubling for us and I think for you because this is a very important project for the county. And we're hearing a lot of things right now that I think are troubling not only to this panel, but I think to you. And I'm wondering if you even want to continue this line of questioning.
I'm here to answer your questions as well as I can.
Okay.
Okay?
All right, Mr. Miller, let's try to, if we can keep the questions for Mr. Whitehead right now focused on BCI.
When we got up to the 23,500,000 number, did that number then comply with all of the FEMA requirements?
I'm not sure I could say that it complied with all of them. That would be a question ADG could answer today. It complied with substantially more than the original criteria did, yes.
And
Well, may I say, it applied those criteria to more of the building than the original design did.
And when we took out the 3.5 million to get from 23 million and a half to 20, did we take out things that had been added previously, or did we take out different things?
Again, ADG can answer that in detail, but I believe the things that were taken out primarily were enhancements that had been added during the initial design period, which were in addition to the criteria that BCI wrote. One exception to that is the special ops building.
And in the spreadsheet that listed the items that took us from 21,476,000 to 23,528,000, there's an item of $200,000 for county fees. Why would we charge $200,000 in fees on our own building?
I think Shook would have to answer that question.
Ginger Cox, Public Works. Dale, that money is something that Public Works puts in their project for paying county management fees, because Public Works charges back to projects. So we typically put an amount in there. It's in the budget. It's not something that the contractor is charging us. That is something that's in the budget that the county personnel charge against. That helps.
Yeah, so it's not a cash flow issue.
Correct.
It's merely a contract. It's almost like an internal services fund issue.
Okay. I'll defer
Okay.
till later.
Any other questions for BCI? No? Did you have anything you'd like to add?
No, not
Okay.
at this time.
If you please stick around, we might have more questions.
I will be here.
All right, thank you. I guess Ginger, from who do you have from Shook?
We have Carrie Ash.
Okay.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and committee. My name is Carrie Ash. I am the project manager for the Design Build project. With me is Susan Gant. She's with ADG out of Winter Park, Florida. Did you have any direct questions at this time that you had for the Design Build team?
Well, I guess where I'd like to take it is where your involvement started. I know Shook started before ADG, from where you started with the project. So effectively where Mr. Whitehead left off and where Shook started and the process in which you became engaged in the project.
Sure. I'm actually going to bring up Chris Halpy. He's the executive vice president of our company. He was involved during the RFP process before I was assigned as project manager.
Okay, great, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Council. I guess in brief, the county issued an RFQ for a design build contract based on the criteria documents prepared by BCI. We as Shook partnered, so now we're the lead contractor as the builder, so we have to partner with design partners and propose our qualifications versus competition. We chose to partner with Susan's firm, ADG, for their well-regarded National Emergency Operations Center experience, as well as our local mechanical design partners, Osborne Engineering, and they brought a lot of history as well with the project together. So we formed that team, proposed our qualifications, and ultimately went through an RFQ and then an RFP process whereby we were selected as the successful design build partner to the county.
So you were selected with yourselves, with Osborne, and with ADG as a package?
As a team, yes. We're the lead. There are subcontractors, if you will, but as a team.
And so collectively, as a team, how many, what's the experience in building emergency operation centers? Or design, let's start with the design of emergency operation centers.
Do you want to take?
To date, our company's about 40 years old, and we have done approximately 35 EOCs, sometimes in conjunction with emergency communication centers, more often than not in conjunction with that.
And what's the size of the emergency operation centers that you've built? And more specifically, in relation to the size of Cuyahoga County?
Okay. We've had a couple that are small in Texas, approximately 7,000 square feet, but the majority are between about 28,000 square feet up to about 50,000 square feet.
And in relation to our center,
And the center, before special ops was removed, was 44,000 square feet.
okay, so this is right kind of in your specialty area.
Correct.
Okay. Okay, and as far as Shook and Osborne as well, if you can address them.
Sure. And as far as Osborne, part of the value that they bring to our team, and I apologize, we didn't have them represented here today, but there are several people on their design staff that worked for URS. You know, now you've heard some history going back on the iteration, some of the early programming of this project. I can't speak specifically, but they have a strong technology group, and they have been involved in some of the other dispatch projects that have happened within or related to the county recently. So we felt like they brought a strong mechanical, electrical technology offering. And then Shook, our background is not as much specifically emergency operations centers as it is data centers and telecom. Locally here in Northeast Ohio since 2000, we've had a group focused on doing really nothing but what we call mission critical work. So a lot of work for, well, it was SBC, but then AT&T, Verizon, Case Western, kind of down the line. So, you know, truthfully, you know, the strength is in the team. That's why we went and found a partner in Winter Park, Florida, of all places, but we knew we had to round out our team with the expertise necessary to deliver the facility that the county desired.
Okay. And so you inherited a plan that the county was operating under. And what was your evaluation? And we've got two primary documents from you. One, I'll just hold it up, but one I'll refer to as has the yellow bar on it. The other has the blue bar across the top. When you sat down and evaluated the design the county was currently operating under at the time you were engaged, what did you determine?
So the first step in the process is we prepare what we reference as an SD estimate. It's a schematic design estimate. We take the criteria documents that Branstetter Carroll published in the criteria specifications, and we put together that SD estimate. Ginger referenced that earlier, and that amount was $21,615,686.
Now, which is there a document?
I
that
do
can-
not believe you have that. I'll explain what that is in a moment. So we published a detailed schematic design estimate. That was on January 13th of 2015. Then the normal next step in the process is the design build team has what they call design charrettes. And that's where you meet as a team and you start to develop the design. You start to move forward. However, in this instance, it was a little different because we were told immediately that there was a budget issue after we published our SD estimate, that we needed to do some value engineering.
Told by who?
Ginger Cox, our team, sat down with us and said, we need to do some value engineering. So we all kind of took a breath, looked at the programming, and went into what I would describe an extremely detailed value engineering session. As a design builder, as you're going through the design, you always look at value engineering. Ways to do things smarter without compromising the integrity of the building, but more economical. In this sense, we actually had to do a redesign. And I'll give you an example, a very simple example of one of the things that we thought could have done more economically without impacting your integrity of your building. In your in your criteria design, you initially had the equipment room, the electrical room, and the equipment, electrical, and mechanical room in the basement of your facility. This facility had a basement. We thought it would be more cost effective to not excavate a basement. If you're familiar with site work is actually one of your largest dollar components. To not excavate the basement and put that basement square footage on the second floor of your building. It was going to eat up some mezzanine space that you had over the garage, but economically it was the best approach to do so. So we moved those facilities from the basement to the second floor. Another added benefit to that is you normally do not want equipment rooms in a basement. Just from a residential standpoint, water goes to a basement, so you want to keep that above ground. So that was one of the value engineering items that we did.
Is that a FEMA guideline, or is a FEMA acceptable to put it in the basement?
With the proper protection, it's acceptable,
It's acceptable.
right, for primary feed.
Mr. Chairman, if I.
Mr. Jones.
When you started the value engineering session, did the administration say to you, we just need you to do as much value engineering as possible? Or did they say, here's a dollar amount we need to target for getting this job completed?
I'm thinking back here. Well, first, the message was extremely clear. One is we had to cut dollars severely, but they were not, a lot of your constructors, I'm going to be very general here, a lot of people will come in and say, lap off 10,000 square feet. They think it's an easy fix. The message was very clear. We need to start getting smart. We need to cut dollars extremely severely, but don't compromise the core intent of the facility. So of course, one of the first things that you're going to look at is aesthetics, because that doesn't compromise your core programming, how the building functions. I do want to apologize. I'd have to look through my paperwork to tell you the exact dollar value they told us to cut. I could not tell you exactly, but
It's cheating, but it's okay.
it was in, after that session, I think we presented around 2 million in cuts, generally speaking.
If we could get that exact figure and who told you that?
Can I add one thing?
Of course.
Actually, we were given two different charges. One was to evaluate the schematic design, find efficiencies. They also looked at timeline. For instance, there was masonry, filled masonry on the main core. Eventually, they went to a precast because of the time of erection was going to be shorter period of time, and that was going to lead to dollars. But they also gave us a charge for our team to evaluate what was in the schematic design package and compare it to what would ideally be in the package. So we had a number of recommendations. So while there were some value engineering subtractions, there were also some adds to beef this up and get this closer to a FEMA guideline design facility. So those two things were going on at the same time.
So you two individuals do this for a living, and you're giving a charge from folks who don't do this for a living on what needs to be taken out to save dollars and cents.
No, they were relying on us to make recommendations and to tell them why we were making the recommendations. When we evaluate, we look at the 5 priorities for EOCs and communication centers. The number 1 priority is this program and are the spaces and the way they're laid out, does that follow a normal EOC mission? Does it support the mission? We looked at it, it supported the mission. So the number 1 priority was there. Number 2, does the building shell, is it being detailed to be built to be survivable? Well, that's where we had some recommendations because it was close, but it wasn't exactly what FEMA guidelines would tell you to do. Number 3 was, are the utilities feeding this appropriate? And number 4 is, is there redundancy in the utilities and are they protected too? Because if you build a building but don't protect your facilities and your communications and your electrical power go down, you have kind of a dead building.
Right.
So
But
we were looking at those.
the overarching interesting thing to me is you had a set dollar amount to hit, or they would like you to have hit.
Correct.
Very interesting.
Correct. Now, what we did when looking at the spaces, it appeared there were spaces that had been added to the project that weren't specifically germane to the EOC mission. And that's why Special Ops first became a metal building instead of permanent construction in the hopes of bringing down the cost. And then we said, they said, could we do without that? And although it's an important function, it's not specifically germane to the emergency operations and emergency communications mission. So that's why that was removed and people felt comfortable in removing it. There were a few other items that also went through that evaluation. So there's been some space reduction. Some it'd be nice to see from an operational standpoint, but it's not absolutely necessary for that function.
That in and of itself is good. I mean, if we could save money, we could save money.
Sure, sure.
So I want to clarify,
I'm sorry, one thing, and Ms. Brown brought this up. You said there were 5, but you only named 4.
Somebody's listening.
Yeah.
Okay. The fifth one. Okay. The fifth one is a secure site. And I'm listing these in order of absolute priority. So if you have limited dollars, and there's usually this balance between dollars and functionality, the security of the site, the reason it's the fifth priority is that it's very dependent on what's around it. In this case, it's a municipal complex with a police headquarters next door. And this project came in as a secure site, which is recommended, but that's not a FEMA requirement. So it's an assessment of risk. And given the other functions of City Hall, the police department, that's why some of that has also been removed in this project, or at least indicated as an ad alternate.
Okay.
So that's a little bit about why or how we evaluate.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Miller?
The special ops, can you say a little bit about what services and functions that would have provided if it had been included?
Randy, I think you would be best to speak to that.
So, Councilman, the special operations facility was something that would have been offered up to countywide specialty teams to store specialty team vehicles. The Urban Search and Rescue, for example, has semi-tractor trailer, logistic trailer. Many times these vehicles were bought with grant funds and they're stored at different municipal centers right now. It would kind of be a one place that they could all be stored, worked on and such. That was the intent of that. But again, it would be completely separate than although they would all be connected together, completely separate than the Emergency Operations Center and the Dispatch Center.
And how much money was involved in taking that item out?
Like 900,000.
To delete the garage, which also went with, we were able to remove an oil interceptor. There was some concrete around the area, a retaining wall, and part of an asphalt drive. It was a savings of $902,600. I do want to clarify one thing, I'm sorry, that was asked. When you asked the amount initially, we were tasked with deleting. I just want to clarify, we've been value engineering since around early February, all the way up through April 28th. So I don't want anybody to think that the value engineering session happened in a vacuum. It only happened at one time. As we would propose the value engineering and we would say, okay, this is what we got out, we would report a number and they would come back, the county personnel that we were working with would come back and say, that's not acceptable, we need to cut another, in such case, maybe $1 million. So I don't want anybody to think that it happened at one time. It was a process from February all the way through April, okay?
If I might.
Sure. Mr. Jones and Mr. Gallagher?
For the value engineering process from February to April, who has been the contact person at the county? Has that been Ginger? It is Ginger?
Yes, it is Ginger.
Is the value engineering process still going on, and when do you anticipate, if it has not already happened, but when do you anticipate coming to the end where you cannot tease out any more dollars?
So we were just recently tasked with getting the number to $20,100,000. It is in our opinion, as the design builder, I believe you are there. I do not recommend removing anything further from your building. That is our professional opinion, knowing what your needs are.
When did you make that recommendation?
I published that specific value engineering piece on April 28th. And what I did when I published that, and I think this is very important to point out, knowing that there were monetary issues, it was our recommendation that some of the wants that we feel as your design builder that you should have should be exercised as what we reference in the industry as ad alternates. And what's important to understand about an ad alternate is that we will continue to design those portions for you into the documents. But the day that we go out to bid, we'll ask the contractors to list a separate price for those. If we find when our bids come in that the numbers are good, the county can elect to choose those, because the items that we're assigning as add alternates can be constructed at a later date. We had that caveat that we felt that if you went with those options, there were a couple options that should have been exercised as add alternates.
When you made that, if I might, just a few more questions. When you made that recommendation or made that statement, in your professional opinion, what was the administration's response at that time? Or have they yet to respond?
No, they were very pleased with that. They liked that idea. They thought that was a good way to solve a big problem.
Mr. Gallagher, then Ms. Brown.
And I'm still trying to figure out where the big problem is, where this big problem came from. But you said that the 21.1, you got to the 21.1,
Initially.
you know.
So
what- was
where are
it-
we at right now?
Yeah.
We are at 20,098,000.
98,000. And the county's okay with that?
That I'm not able to answer. We were told that they would get back to us.
Who would you bring that to?
Who would I?
You specifically, who would you bring that to?
I brought these value engineering and the new dollar value to a meeting that was, Ginger Cox was present, Michael Dever was present, Ed Kraus was present. I'd have to look at the whole sign-in sheet, but we had a formal meeting
Okay.
where I presented. Oh, thank you.
I was present also, and then we're still having discussions to make sure we're satisfied with it. But as I said earlier in my opening statement, the integrity and the functionality of the building, I'm confident as a law enforcement person that it's still what we need.
Well, I've yet to talk to the architect that's going to verify that.
Okay.
But, well, let me ask you that. Are you confident?
We're confident if some of the alternates can be accepted, because in those alternates is the protection of the emergency utilities, the generator, the fuel tank, the condensing units,
And the transformer.
and the transformer. We think those need to be protected from impact. If those can be accepted, then we feel comfortable with the design.
You know offhand?
Yes, I do. So for the generator enclosure, you're looking at approximately $250,000. For the transformer enclosure, it's about $40,000. And for the condensing unit enclosure, it's $115,000.
And this is without the garage, but with the possibility of putting the garage back on at a later date?
No,
No, okay.
no. The garage was not listed as an add alternate suggestion.
Let me interrupt, just so I understand. So these enclosures, you were talking about the transformer and what have you, are they currently in the 20,100,000 or no?
No, they are listed at this time as recommended add alternates. They are designed for, but they are not included in that number. And I think it is a very good idea to exercise them as add alternates, because I would just want everybody to understand an enclosure of such can be constructed at a later date. It's something that we can look at after we receive the bids in. If we see that our bids are good, it's something that we can exercise 4 months into the process. There are masonry structure, concrete foundations, masonry structure, and steel. It would be easy to do. We could accommodate that. I would not recommend doing something if I didn't feel that we could accommodate that. I know we can accommodate that, and that's why I believe it's a good plan.
Ms. Brown?
Yes, I'm looking at the line, it looks like the revisions. And SA 17, there was a recommendation to reduce the hardened core wind speed. Who made that recommendation? It looks like it was rejected, but did that come from the county or did that come from the construction? Did that come from you?
That did come from the county. The county asked if it would be feasible to reduce the wind speed to 120 miles per hour. And I believe, I can't speak for them, but I believe that recommendation came from other facilities that you have in the area. I don't know if they're built to that wind speed or not. Our design team's recommendation was no, that is not a good value, and it's not even a value, it's not a good option to elect. Susan could speak in more detail, but the new FEMA 361 code is actually to 250 miles per hour. And we brought a wind speed map here so you could see it. The criteria documents detailed 200 mile per hour. It was in our opinion that the 200 mile per hour was sufficient for this facility. However, we do not agree with reducing it down to 120 miles per hour. And that's why it ended up being rejected, because they listened to what our professional opinion was.
Additionally, you had mentioned that the, and I think this goes back to BCI, you said that the site work is usually the highest, one of the largest expenses. And I'm looking at the original cost estimate here where BCI stated that they did include utilities, but I'm looking at 598. Would that have been for the excavation to include, that could not have included the basement? Or how, can you explain that line item for me, the 598?
We would have to have Branstetter or Carroll answer that question, because that came from their estimate. Did you want?
Sure, if council member would like that, if BCI could come up and address that.
I'll introduce Nancy Nozick of Branstetter Carroll. She is an architect who was highly involved in this.
That number addressed parking areas, pavement areas. There was an earthwork number that was associated with the estimates that included the basement. We did have some assumptions in there for utilities, but as we mentioned earlier, they were undervalued in terms of that estimate. We should have had additional costs identified for the site utilities in that site number, and I apologize, they weren't in there at that time. So it did include all of the components, just not to an extent that covered what eventually would have been required.
Mr. Jones?
You just, you did, Council Chairman? Oh, okay, all right. All right. I was just thinking of the term value engineering. I like that term. I've done it, but I didn't use that term before. If I had to build a building or buy a building, I get something with all the bells and whistles, and then I go back and look and say, no, I don't need all of that, and scale it down. Sometimes I even say we have to go in a different direction. I don't know what the administration will ultimately do. Obviously, they're looking to scale back to some degree. So they're at 20 million, and the administration will have some decisions to make. My one question is, what have we, and I'm thinking along terms of, if they hear 20 million and then the administration decides something differently, what have you invested to this point? How much money has been spent? Because I think we've broken ground, is that correct?
Yes,
Have
we have broken ground.
How much money have you put into the project?
I will have to look at our most recent pay application.
And that's probably really for the administration to answer.
Our original contract with them is for $1,178,000, around there, and they're about 62% complete.
62% of 1 million.
Right, right.
I was talking
Yeah, just this.
Are there any dollars, Ginger, any dollars outside of this particular 1 million? How much for the whole project have you invested to this point?
It's probably a little over $1 million, maybe $1.2 million. Well, I'm sorry, we need to include Branstetter Carroll's fees also. So that's another $700,000 on top of that. So I would say roughly $2 million.
A little over 2 million. Okay.
Let me just kind of,
And I didn't say that as an advocate
No,
for
no, no.
something.
No, look,
Just-
there's one thing that we should have tied in here, is that this was originally heard in Mr. Gallagher's committee under Public Safety and Justice Affairs, and it was referred to this committee to go over the financial component of it. This will has not, this will go back to Mr. Gallagher's committee. So, to quote, some of my southern friends, all y'all be prepared to come back at a future date to discuss some operational issues. The pertinent financial issues, though, is really where I want to focus on here. And so what I'm hearing from Shook, to kind of cut to the chase, is that there are some items that you believe are still essential to the building. You're referring to them as recommended alternatives, because the recommended alternatives, because the budget told you not to go above that. But if you were building the building, being as fiscally mindful as you can be with being operationally mandated, it's a strong word, operationally driven, meaning you're providing the essential services, you believe these recommended alternatives should be included.
Yes, there's a total of 7.
Okay,
Mr.
and
Chairman.
what are those 7?
The first recommended alternate is add acoustical treatments in EOC 160.
And which document should I be, do I have that in any of these documents?
If you have the deviation log dated April 28th, 2015, it would be on there.
The blue bar one, right?
If it's dated April 28th, yes, you have it.
In the far right hand?
Yes,
Okay,
correct.
so where should I be looking?
You want to be on the last page.
Okay,
It's in the section under total current budget. It's titled proposed alternates. Okay.
got it.
Is everybody familiar with what an acoustical treatment is? Just so that, okay, so an acoustical treatment would deaden sound. I think is the best way to say that. And why we offer that as something to exercise as an ad alternate is because in most cases, the design for acoustical treatments is not done until your building is finished, because you actually have a DB engineer come in and do an acoustics analysis. You want furniture in the space, you want carpeting down in the space, you want the FF&E items in the space to see how the sound bounces off the walls. Any questions on that?
Okay.
The second item is waterline backfeed. And that is suggested in the situation if a water line goes down outside of the facility. It is our understanding that the county has access to a water truck that could connect to this connection at the building and provide water to the occupants inside the building. The third, fourth, and fifth are what I referenced earlier, the generator enclosure. The generator is what provides power to your facility in the case of in case the power to the building goes down. Transformer.
I'm sorry, yes.
I'm sorry.
That we reduce the size of the generator, is that right? Or that was a recommendation? Did I read that correctly?
It was, and that's a good question. Initially, your criteria design had 2 550 generators. As we developed the design for the needs of the county, we noticed that we had to increase the size of the generators to a 750. The simplest way I can explain it to you is that it's very expensive. It's a very large generator. Our recommendation was to eliminate one of the generators, have one for the facility, and provide roll-up connections to back up the backup generator.
But let me ask you, is it the intent to always have 2 generators? Forget the cost, forget the size. Is the intent always to have 2 generators?
Redundancy is always
Right.
key. We want to have as much redundancy as possible. However, everybody has to understand you can be redundant upon redundant upon redundant when designing these facilities. So yes, I mean, that's always, that's a want. That would be in your want. We would really want that.
Because the analogy I used when I was with the Olympic Committee, we had A, B, and C rated venues. The A rated venues had double redundancy on our generators. That was an Olympic venue, not an emergency operations center. That's why when I saw the reduction from 2 generators to 1, regardless of the size, I was perplexed by that, because if you're on shore power and shore power goes out, you're on your generator goes out, you're dead, because you have no redundancy to roll up. I know Mr. Dever mentioned, well, we'd roll up additional generators, but if you're in that much of a crisis situation, chances are those generators may be at Metro Health, they may be at another facility that's just as needy, because their situation may be more dire.
That's a correct statement. And usually the facilities that would provide your generator, the hospitals have first dibs, so to speak. I don't know a better way to say that. They have first dibs on those generators.
So what-
We
what-
did explain that, and we did talk about that, but from what Susan was referencing, a risk analysis, it was elected to be taken.
Well, we thought it was possible if there's an agreement and the county's in line to have something available, say within 48 hours. If not, we're still concerned about that. It's called N+1 redundancy.
So what would, so if you have a proposed alternative B category, would this be the first item under that next level of request?
Yes.
And what's the cost of that, of a 750 generator?
If you go, it's listed on here, I'm sorry.
But that would change a lot of things, wouldn't it? It would change the size of your pad, your compound, your perimeter fencing around the generator. So it's not just the cost of the generator.
No, it's not, and we actually detail that in the log that you're looking at. If you go to line item E05, it's a value of $335,000. Within that value, you are correct. It includes the space of the concrete pad. Well, it would be the foundations for those concrete pad.
And protected on.
That's an alternate. That's right. So. But yes, it's not just the generator. Without getting too technical, there's also gear. It's called paralleling gear that has to go along with it because it's how the two generators work. So
Is that included in the 335?
it is, yes.
Okay, okay. All right,
So if
great.
you were to choose to add that back in, that would be the value you added back in.
Okay. Yeah, let me continue with Ms. Brown and then Mr. Miller.
Will we add EO8 back with that, since we're?
That was the item that we suggest you do as an add alternate because it can be constructed at a later date.
Okay. Okay, Mr. Miller.
If you wanted to add the second generator back in, plus you wanted to enclose both of them, would the cost of enclosures be more than the 250,000? Is the 250,000 as an add alternate, assuming you're only going to enclose one generator?
No, that was for both. That was for both.
So
No, I did not shrink that number.
So if you
If you enclose a one, it actually would be less dollars than that.
less than the 250?
Yes, correct,
Okay.
yes.
Okay.
That was a good question. Thank you.
Okay, so please continue.
Oh, I was talking about the alternate. Sorry, I got them.
Yes, no, sorry.
The second to last one is furnish and install a motorized gate. I want to clarify this, that the design currently with the $20,098,000 has what we reference as the infrastructure, the electrical, the brains behind the motorized gate. That value is just to come back at a later date and install the gate. So the conduit, the wire, the data to use that gate would already be put in place. So if you wanted to elect to do that later, you could. You'd have the infrastructure there. That's just for the gate itself. And the last item is to furnish and install a perimeter fence. Again, that's something that can be done at any time. It doesn't have to be done on opening day. It can be done 5 months down the road. The reason why we also suggested that is because of where your site is located. You are back in a developed area that is behind a police station. Okay.
So if you were, so now we're talking about fundamentally building the core of an EOC. All right, forget the garage for right now and some of the administrative functions, but the defined core of an EOC. If we had, this is roughly another $1 million of, it's just under $1 million. If we add the 335 for the extra generator in there.
Yeah, that's probably correct
So
statement.
now you're at, just say 21 million as kind of a number. A lot of what we've talked about in the county since we began was consolidating our operations to be more efficient. And I haven't gotten into, and we'll wait until Mr. Gallagher's committee to talk about the consolidation of the various specialized equipment that is currently housed in different municipalities throughout the county, what the value is of having that located, say, in the garage itself or some other administrative functions. You know, what I'm trying to get a hold of, and I don't want to be pressed for time for the sake of being pressed for time, just like I didn't want you to be pigeonholed into building an emergency operations center for a specific number, but I want to understand, the county went out and bonded based on BCI's recommendation, and it was off. Some of it was off by scope changes. I get that. We can't, that's on us. Some was off because they just flat out missed numbers, which they acknowledged that they missed on the utility hookup as an example. I want to understand what the misses were versus what the scope creep was. And what you're telling me at the end of the day, based on FEMA standards and what you're saying, as far as an EOC is concerned, the $1,100,000 is still about $1 million short. If you
add the alternates.
If you add the
That's a
alternates
correct
in there,
statement.
okay. All right, that's what I'm trying to understand. What we need to understand is, from a financial perspective, how to make this work. But then also, before we do that, and to Mr. Gallagher's point, although he doesn't say this as often as I do, we're the 29th largest county in the country. All right, we only have one emergency operations center. It should be designed, built, run, and managed to meet our needs. And not meet Cadillac needs, but meet the needs of what we do to operate effectively and efficiently. And if that's 21 million, it's 21 million. If it's 17, it's 17. If it's 24, it's 24. But it's incumbent upon us, one of the most mission critical functions we do as a county is provide public safety. We need to design one, build it, run it, manage it, so that it meets our needs, and we'll make the economics of it work. Yeah, Mr. Miller.
I just want to say that I support totally what you're saying. If we add $1 million onto the emergency operations center, it's 5% of the project cost, and if we need another 5% to have a building that we really feel gives us the kind of capability that we need in the event of an emergency, it's worth it. Yeah, I know that we have long-term financing constraints and that we absolutely need to find value where we can find value, but we got to do this right. We have to have something. We don't want to spend $20 million and feel like it's really not quite what it needs to be. It would be better to spend $21 million and feel that we really have what we need to get the job done.
Any other comments? If not, did you have anything else you would like to add?
No, I do not.
Okay,
Susan?
Ms.
No, the only thing I wanted to say is where FEMA gets its standards is from storm data. And Cleveland is in the highest wind speed rating for tornadoes. And even though you might not have had a tornado in the last 10, 15 years, that's where they evaluate, and that's where these standards come from. It's not just pulled out of a hat. So there's data behind it, and that's where we get our recommendations.
And we actually
have one less than 5 miles away from Dundee Heights 2 years ago.
Okay, so it's very fresh in your minds.
Yeah.
And if I may add, I did say, we've been going through this process ever since February. There's been a lot of information exchange. The design has changed. A lot of meetings. If there's anything I didn't answer, I wasn't clear on, please just make sure it gets to me, and I will make sure it gets answered for you.
Okay, and I appreciate that. And we'll,
If we could move this back to safety in a couple weeks, and we'll let you know, we'll give you time. But I think it must be said, I think we're being kind of rough on some folks, but I think that's our job, is to be rough, because this is a big deal. This has been going on for a long time. I kind of feel bad that there were names brought up here today that aren't here to defend themselves. Whether they need to be defended or not, I don't know, and I quite honestly at this point don't care. What Mr. Miller says is exactly what I think we need to be concentrating on, is building a building that's going to take us into the future, is going to make this county safe. And as Mr. Greenspan says, we're the 29th largest county. We need to do this, do it right. And the finance and the tough part of this is on our end. And that's what we're going to do. So I thank everybody for being here today. And if we were a little bit rough on you, we apologize, but we're trying to get to the bottom. I don't think there's ever been a project like this where it started in Parma and then went to Independence possibly, and then went to Broadview Heights, and then went here, and then it was a mess from the beginning, and I think we all recognize that. So thank you for all being here.
And I also want to reiterate the statements made. And it appears that there was a rush for whatever reason for this project to move forward. You know, who would have bonded out? Who would have thought that you know, before the GMP was in place, we would have secured our financing? And that was based on reliance of information we received in the past. So with that, and Sheriff or Chief Bova, do you have anything else you want to add before we close?
I have nothing, thank you.
Okay, great. And so what we'll do now, this item will be referred back to Mr. Gallagher's committee, and he'll set the 2 weeks, so 2 weeks from Tuesday at 1 p.m. The second at 1 p.m.
Okay, thank you.
Is there any other, going back to the agenda?
Simple question.
Yes.
For the administration, when will you make a determination? Do you have a timetable for your decision on the project?
We are having ongoing discussions, and you know, hopefully sooner the better we'll have an answer for everyone next time I'm in front of you.
Okay, very good, thank you. Any miscellaneous business? Any public comment unrelated to the agenda?
No, Mr. Chair, no one has signed in.
All right, then we stand adjourned. Thank you.